This conference will now be recorded.
Anatomy and all we have discussed yesterday. So I'm skipping it off. Coming to the epidemiology of the carcinoma prostate. So it is the second leading cause of cancer death in men in Western population. In India, that is not the more common. In India, the most common cancer is, can anyone tell me that? In females and males.
Lung cancer.
Yeah, lung cancer in whom?
Males.
If you differentiate it between males and females.
Males, sir.
Okay. In females?
Breast cancer, then cervical cancer.
Okay. Yeah. So breast cancer is more common in Western population females. Cervical cancer is more common in Indian females. That you should remember. And overall, most common cancer in Indian population is oral malignancies. So in etiology, family history has a relative indication about 2 to 3 fold increase in men with first degree relative history. Hereditary association is also there, accounting for 10%. And in racial factors, African American males have more predisposition for prostatic cancer. Diet is a non-important etiological factor, but there are some modifiable risk factors which constitute in developing prostatic cancer, like diet rich in carotenoids can lead to these are protective vitamins. As with all cancers, association with cigarette smoking and alcohol use has a relative risk indication. What is the cancer with viral origin? Any one cancer which comes due to a viral load?
Cervical cancer.
Due to?
HPV 16-18.
Yeah. There are other things like due to HIV and HIV can lead to a few certain cancers like Kaposi sarcoma, etc. So that is due to not entirely due to the virus, but due to the decreased immunity. So of all the subtypes, adenocarcinoma is the most common one, constituting about 95% of the prostate cancers. Other histological subtypes are the small cell carcinoma, Mischness carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and transitional cell carcinoma, etc. This transitional cell carcinoma occur near the prostatobladder junction. So, as transitional cell carcinoma is common in the bladder. So, whenever transitional cell carcinoma occurs in a prostate, it will always be near the bladder and prostatic junction. So, you should remember the most common one is the adenocarcinoma. All the other subtypes constitute about 5%. Adenocarcinoma in itself constitute 95%. The clinical manifestations are similar to the LUTS, as I have discussed yesterday. LUTS is, anyone tell me what is LUTS?
Lower urinary tract symptoms.
Symptoms, yeah. So you have been listening to the class. In the early stages of the cancer, the symptoms are vaguely asymptomatic. When it is advancing with locally advanced type of disease, there are the LUTS symptoms like the hesitancy, obstructive features, decreased stream, hematuria, etc. These are all the locally advanced disease symptoms like that. If you want to, you can write it down. What I am telling is from the Campbell and Walsh urology, so it is a little bit extensive. Ideally, don't need all these. Always, what you should remember whenever a question is asked in your exam about a prostate cancer is epidemiological risk factors, epidemiology risk factors, clinical manifestations. Then comes your investigations and treatment. That is what is expected from you. You don't need to write about the recent advances. There are several things, chemotherapy, etc. Chemotherapy, radiotherapy, brachytherapy. These all are there, but you should know a brief idea, not entirely. But if you know what are the drugs that are used, that is well enough for undergraduate level. So when the locally advanced disease progresses to an advanced disease, there is always a spread to the lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessel obstruction leads to, pelvic lymph node obstruction leads to obstruction of the lymphatic vessels in the lower extremity. So this leads to edema. And the last one is the metastatic disease, which is commonly bone pain and paraparesis. Relatively rare, because always you should remember when discussing about prostate cancer is it is always in older age group. So a patient in early, that is 40 to 50 years of age, you don't usually have a prostatic cancer. Relatively very rare. What they have is the benign prostatic hyperplasia. So about 90% of the patients of above 80 to 90 years of age will have some level of BPH. Some of them can develop into prostatic cancer. So about 80 years of age lo carcinoma vachinappudu, that is not a relatively a very aggressive type of carcinoma. So here, due to the advanced disease, there are chances of hematuria and hematospermia. So advanced disease can invade any type of the tissue. So as it is present near to the rectal mucosa and bladder, it can go into the cancer cells can proliferate into the bladder. That can lead to hematuria, or when it invades the urethra, it can also cause hematuria. So when it involves into the rectum, then you have constipation, intermittent diarrhea, or hematochezia. Hematochezia is, what is hematochezia? What is the difference between hematochezia and melena?
Hematochezia is a frank blood in stool, sir.
Yeah.
Melena.
So hematochezia conditions are hemorrhoids and carcinomas or seizures. These all leads to hematochezia or some carcinomas involving the descending colon can also present with hematochezia. So relatively, what you should say is hematochezia is by indication is a cause due to lower abdominal, lower gastrointestinal tract abnormalities. Whereas melena is a upper gastrointestinal abnormality. It is not 100%, but maximum of the time melena is due to some pathology in the upper gastrointestinal tract. So the same thing where in advanced BPH, what happens is the renal impairment due to the prolonged bladder outlet. This leads to reflux and hydroerythronephrosis. The same thing can happen here also due to the obstruction of the bladder. So in advanced disease, due to the metastatic symptoms or the bone pain and pathological fractures. The most common type of bone involvement is the spinal cord in prostatic cancer. In the end, if it is prolongedly neglected, patient didn't go to a hospital or get himself checked at any time of the above mentioned while he was developing above mentioned symptoms, he can present to your OPD as an advanced stage with all these type of complaints. So due to the spinal cord involvement, there can be neurological deficits and sensory motor changes. And involvement of the para-aortic and pelvic lymph nodes can lead to the edema in the lower extremity and the genital areas. As the lymph nodes causes pressure symptoms over the pressure effects over the lymphatic systems. So they get obstructed and the limbs cannot go up. So coming to the staging, there are two stagings that are the most commonly used. One is the TNM staging, and the other one for clinical importance is the Gleason's staging. So here primary tumor TH and T0 are the same in any type of carcinomas. In T1, there is clinically inapparent tumor, neither palpable or not visible by imaging. So you cannot palpate or visualize it through imaging. That is T1. So T1A is an incidental finding in histology. T B is incidental histology with more than 5% of the tissue resected. And T1C is a tumor identified by needle biopsy. So when the tissue is tested with PSA, when there is an elevated PSA in the tissue, you can always confirm it is an suspected prostatic cancer. So that is T1C. And then comes the T2. Again, it has T2A, T2B, and T2C. So T2A is the one half of the one lobe of the prostate. There are three lobes in prostate. So when one half or one lobe is involved, it is T2A. When more than one half of the one lobe is involved, it is T2B. And both lobes are involved, it is T2C. So remember simply that T1 is histological finding. T2 is a lobular involvement of the prostate, while T3 is a what do you call extension. So locally advanced disease is T3. That is, it can extend beyond the prostatic capsule or extracapsular extension, or it can involve the seminal vesicles. And T4 is the most aggressive type of the tumor staging where bladder, rectum, or muscles can get involved. So, and staging is the similar one. N0 is no regional lymph nodes, and one is metastasis. Try to remember the grading of TNM. At least if you don't remember the subtypes, you can at least remember the T1, T2, and T3 type of staging. So coming to the diagnostic workup, so the most important one is the serum PSA. That is prostate specific antigen. It is again divided into total free and percentage free. There are three subtypes in PSA levels. Then the radiographic imaging is the transrectal ultrasonography. Through transrectal ultrasonography, you can also take a biopsy as a means of guided biopsy. The other things are the needle biopsy and chest radiograph to rule out metastatic disease. And the last three, which are MRI, radioisotope bone scan, and PET scan, are for metastatic disease. You don't usually do this type of test in your normal OPD. So only in advanced stages where the patient has systemic symptoms and all these metastatic symptoms, you go for radioisotope or PET scan to make it into to make your clear-cut stage of the disease. So clinical diagnosis, you can always suspect a carcinoma through digital rectal examination. As I said yesterday while talking about BPH. So when it is a nodulated or bloody DRE is seen with a painful prostate while palpating the prostate through rectum, you can suspect it can be a cancer. So the normal serum PSA levels is usually between 4 to 4 nanogram per ml. In elevated cases, it is mild, moderate, and severe. Based on the PSA level, it is again classified into mild, moderate, and severe. Mild is about 7 to 8, I guess. 7 to 8 nanogram per milliliter is mild. About 10 is moderate, and above 14 is severe. So while doing a transrectal ultrasonography, the type of tissue removed can be different because with single biopsy you cannot diagnose the stage of the tumor. So about as many as 12 biopsies used to be taken. So 12 times you should insert a needle and take out a tissue sample. So that gives you a clear-cut picture of the extent of the tumor in the prostate. So in all this, what you should remember is whenever examiner asks, if you are doing a guided needle biopsy, how many biopsies are taken? That is a sort of question the examiner might ask in your viva. So remember, it used to be 6, but now they are taking 12 biopsies. This is regarding the prostate specific antigen. I have already discussed it. The sensitivity is about only 85%. So when a PSA is elevated, that does not always 100% indicate that it is a carcinoma. It can be also elevated in BPH also. So in about 25% of the patients, you can always get a normal PSA. Even when the patient has carcinoma, it can have normal PSA. These are all are not important to you. Digital rectal examination I have already discussed in the last class about the position and consistency, what you should be. So whenever how to differentiate it between a benign and a carcinomatic prostate is hard, nodular, asymmetrical. It can, the edge of the lobe can be raised or may not be raised, and it will always be surrounded by a compressible necrotic tissue. So whenever a tissue is compressible, whenever a prostate is compressible, you can always suspect there is some necrosed tissue inside. That is why it is compressible. Otherwise, it is always hard and not hard in consistency. So whenever you do a digital rectal examination plus prostate specific antigen, the specificity increases to 87%. Previously, only PSA will have 85%. With DRE, you can increase the chances by 2%. So this is the rectal mucosa in which the cloud finger is there. So this is the prostate, which is palpated against the full bladder. Always full bladder gives you a better chances of palpating the prostate gland. So this is an image of a transrectal ultrasonography. So this is the lobe of the prostate, and this is the bladder. So TRUS is the gold standard for diagnostic tissue biopsy in prostate cancer. You should remember that. Then comes the Gleason score. So this is very important one. So this is based on the pattern of the glandular structure of the prostate. So one is small uniform glands are present in the first grade. So where they are well differentiated. In second and third, there is moderately differentiated pattern of the stromal glands. So what happens is in the second grade, there is more stroma between the glands. In the third one, there is distinctive infiltrative margins where you can separately see the glandular pattern from the stromal pattern. In the fourth and fifth, are more towards the carcinoma sequence where there are irregular masses with the neoplastic glands and necrosed glands are seen in the fifth subtype. So, so in a single slide of tissue, there can be a grade 1 type of uniformity seen in the tissue and a grade 5 type of uniformity seen. So depending on that and calculating the different types of tissue that is generated in different types of cellular level that is present in the tissue, you come to the grading. You might get the doubt to what is this 3 plus 4 equal to 7. So that is what I was trying to tell you. So here, when it is a well differentiated tissue in a single specimen, what the grade is always 2. So the patient will have different types of cellular pattern in a single biopsy tissue. So if it has a well differentiated and again poorly differentiated subtypes in a single tissue, what the grading will be is you give 2 for the well differentiated one and 5 for poorly differentiated one. So 5 plus 2 is 7. So that gives you a score. about the severity of the disease. So if the patient has only one type of pattern, so what you do is 3 plus 3, that is equal to 6. So only well differentiated pattern is seen. So 3 and 3 is done. It gives a value of 6, which is a better prognostic feature. So the best score is 2, while the worst score is 10. So anything above 7 is indicative of a carcinoma, and as the score increases, you can suspect it to be an metastatic disease also. So other imagings are the chest X-rays, axial skeletal survey, etc. Why you do chest X-ray is to rule out pulmonary metastasis. It will always have a miliary pattern of metastatic disease in the lung. Then the ultrasonography and axial skeletal survey, these are all to rule out the metastatic disease. So in skeletal survey, what you can come across is osteoblastic deposits. So that can give you an idea about whether it is a secondary or a metastatic disease. Like an ultrasonography also can rule out hydroureter nephrosis if there is a bladder outlet obstruction due to the enlarged prostate. This can also give you a brief idea whether the patient has a metastatic disease which are deposited in the retroperitoneal lymph nodes or in the liver itself, can have liver metastasis. So the advanced diagnostic modalities are the CT scan and MRI. MRI can give you an idea about the muscular involvement. Whenever you can't differentiate, in CT scan you cannot differentiate between a muscle and fascias. You cannot clearly depict in CT scan. The MRI gives you a better idea. So MRI is used in that. In CT scan, you can grade the disease based on the lymph node involvement in retroperitoneal space. You can also do CT guided FNAC of the lymph nodes. So here it is given that the limitations of, there are certain limitations for every type of diagnostic test. So the limitation of CTR, it cannot enhance the soft tissue resolution. So that is why muscle is a soft tissue. That's why we go for MRI. Microscopic disease cannot be assessed with CT. And there is a chance of artifacts. Artifacts is there is nothing present in the tissue, but due to artifact effects, it can give you a false positive. Again, there are two types of weighted images in MRI, that are T1 weighted images and T2 weighted images. So T1 weighted images provides high contrast. So there is a water density structure, that is prostate, which is rich in fat and fluid, gives you a high contrast picture while doing an MRI. So only MRI alone gives you a sensitivity staging of about 69%. So in any diagnostic procedures, you should not do one single procedure. Only MRI alone doesn't give you a clear picture of the disease. CT alone doesn't give you a better picture of the disease. So PSA alone doesn't give you a better picture. So you should mix and match the different diagnostic modalities depending on your assessment of the disease. So this is a MRI image showing the prostate with adjacent structure. This is the bladder. So B is the bladder, U is the urethra. You can see the blackish discoloration in the midline, that is the urethra, and these two are the prostate lobes. So there is a calcification seen. Sorry, so there is a calcification seen here. So this is the diseased portion. Which is the peripheral zone. So cancer is more common in the peripheral zone of the prostate. So in the peripheral zone, you can see the calcifications here and here. So through that, you can differentiate. These are all not important to undergraduates. Technetium bone scan, again, this is the same thing where it is used for only metastatic disease. Again, not that important to a undergraduate level. So to give you a mild picture of how a PET scan will be there. Here you can see the carcinoma, which is in the pelvic bone, here in the vertebral body. So in PET scan in advanced stages, this is how a metastatic workup will look like on PET CT. Then comes the treatment. Treatment is again based on the stage of the disease. There are again medical management and radiotherapy, brachytherapy, and surgical management. When the disease is localized with no obvious signs of proliferation into the surrounding structures, you should always do a radical prostatectomy. That is the treatment for early disease. For locally advanced, where there is infiltration into the surrounding structures, you do radical prostatectomy with hormonal and radiotherapy. All three are given. In metastatic, there is only about metastatic disease. There is nothing much you can do apart from hormonal therapy and palliative radiotherapy to decrease the symptom load and to prolong the life of the patient. In metastatic disease, palliative radiotherapy is given. So these are NCCN guidelines. It is not important to you. I'll skip this off. So coming to surgery, that is a total radical prostatectomy specimen. So in radical prostatectomy, what you do is you remove the prostate surrounding with the capsule, seminal vesicle, and vas deferens. All these things are removed. Radical. That is why it is called as radical prostatectomy. So the different approaches are retropubic and transperineal. Of this, retropubic is more gives you a better post-operative complications. Transperineal will have always a poor complications in the post-operative period. Then there are laparoscopic and robot-assisted prostatectomies. In today's age, there are very good results based on robotic surgery for urological surgeries that also mainly do prostate. So it is a very limited space. So to operate with bare hands is very cumbersome in some situations. So robot gives you a 360-degree view and also 360-degree maneuverability. So the most commonly used robot is Da Vinci robotic system, which are present in highly advanced hospitals like there are about 5 to 6 present in Andhra Telangana. So the cost of the robot itself is very high. and the learning phase to get acclimatized to the robotic movements is also very technically very hard. So the cost of the procedure is also very high. In open approach, if you can do the surgery for about 1 lakh, in robot assisted, the cost rises to about 10 lakhs. So it all is based on the types of instruments we use. The advantages of robot are less blood loss. There is better magnification than our naked eye. And there is 3-dimensional and 360-degree visualization of the structures that you are dissecting. In advanced disease, what we do is we go for pelvic floor dissection. So in lymph node dissection, the structures that we excise are the fibrofatty tissue and lymphatic tissue present between the bifurcation of the common iliac artery. So the lymph nodes are present in that fibrofatty tissue surrounding the common iliac artery. So entire tissue should be removed in lymph node dissection. This is known as pelvic lymph node dissection. Coming to radiotherapy, again it is adjuvant, radical, and palliative. So adjuvant is given immediately after the radical prostatectomy with positive surgical margins. After doing the surgery, you send it for histopathological reporting. So when the pathologist tells you that it has a positive margins, we go for adjuvant radiotherapy immediately. These are details about radiotherapy, but that is not important. The structure here, it is the pelvic block. So in that field of view, you give radiotherapy to the patient to kill the tissue in the diseased tissue in the pelvis. It can be lymph nodes, it can be marginal unresected tissue that is left over after the surgery. These all are tried out. These all are not important to you. It is about the super specialty level of discussion here. One is the brachytherapy. It is rarely used these days because radiotherapy itself has a very good prognosis. So brachytherapy is not usually used these days. So what they do in brachytherapy is they inject radioiodine-rich seeding. So through injection, radioiodine seeds are implanted into the pelvis near the infiltrated tissues. So this seeds which contain the radiation, they kill the tissue over time, about 6 weeks or 6 months, depending on the dosage that we give to the seeds. These are rarely used these days. So here it is the standards for sterilization of the seeds. About depending on the patient stage, about 100 to 200 seeds can also be implanted into the pelvis. So like this, there will be a sealed block into which needles are and the seeds are implanted. Radiated seeds are implanted. So this is how it will look after if you take an X-ray after the implantation of the seeds. So coming to the chemotherapy, what you should remember is docetaxel. That's all. Nothing else you should remember. Docetaxel, that is platinum-based chemotherapeutic drug. Docetaxel every 3 weeks with prednisolone. So prednisolone, what prednisolone does is it reduces the chances of immune reactions. So as it is a steroid, it decreases the immune reactions. So docetaxel every 3 weeks. You don't even need to remember the cycles or how many doses you should give. Just remember the drug, that is docetaxel. Exemestane can also be used in combination. So there are again newer drugs in the platinum-based group that are cabazitaxel, etc. Then comes the hormonal therapy. So this is an adjuvant type of thing. What we do is there are again 4 types of things you can do. Yesterday while discussing about BPH, I have said about testosterone and what it causes. So it leads to growth factors and it leads to hyperplasia. So when you do an orchidectomy, there is no new testosterone that is developed in the body. So in advanced diseases, orchidectomy is also done along with the prostatectomy. So you remove both the testes, so there is no new testosterone developed in the body. So again, there are inhibition of LHRH. So what we give is LHRH agonist, that is goserelin and leuprolide. These are some examples. And anti-androgens can be given. If the patient is not willing for orchidectomy, which is the best treatment to suppress the testosterone levels. So what we can also do is give anti-androgens like finasteride, flutamide, melutamide, etc. So finasteride is used in the male pattern baldness. So many young males use without knowing side effects of finasteride, they use finasteride drug to prevent hair fall. So this is one of the side effects. What happens is it suppresses the androgens. This can lead to loss in libido, testicular atrophy, etc. And impotency can also be there, but the chances are rare, but it can also lead to impotency. So there are again side effects due to the hormonal therapy, that is loss of libido, erectile dysfunction, gynecomastia. As testosterone levels are decreased, gynecomastia can also occur. Osteoporosis is one main hormonal side effects due to hormonal imbalance. So that is that. In brief about carcinoma of prostate. This prostate is complete. Any doubts? Or is this too extensive for undergraduate level? Try to search for a video of TERP, but I will not find in my archives, but I'll try to see it, show you in YouTube if it is present there. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The video is self-explanatory. So that is a receptoscope. So that is introduced into the canal urethra and invaginated till the enlarged prostate. So the hook that is coming out is the receptor. The scope is receptoscope. So patient is made to lie in a lithotomy position. The receptoscope is introduced into the urethra. So the tissue here is the prostate, the prostatomegaly. So, you can see the collapsed lumen due to the pressure effect of the lobes causing obstructed urethra. So to relieve that, receptor is passed into the urethra. The excessive tissue is curated out. So complete prostatic tissue is curated out. So when you pull it back, tissue comes out with you, and the edge of the receptor has a electrosurgical cautery. So there are the resection can lead to minimal amount of bleeding. So whenever a tissue or a spotter is seen, to the edge of the receptor, you should cauterize the tissue. So once once the entire prostatic tissue is taken out, what we do is introduce a urinary catheter into the bladder to facilitate the healing of the urethra. So here the Foley's catheter is introduced into the bladder, and it is left in place for about 14 days. So meanwhile, the urethra gets healed, then we take out the catheter. This is an animatic representation of heart. So that's it. Thank you.